Welcome to Building Toronto's Skyline, a podcast exploring the current state of Toronto's condominium industry from a unique construction perspective through engaging and entertaining podcast interviews with the many stakeholders in the industry. This podcast is brought to you by Fusion Corp, a construction management company. Here's the founder and CEO of Fusion Corp Developments Inc., and author of Building Toronto Skyline and Battle of the Skyscrapers, the host of this podcast, Nick Ainis.
Hello, hello, hello.
Nick, good to see you again.
Yeah. You know, we should change that intro.
And how would you like to change that intro, Mr. Ainis?
Well, you know what? Maybe instead of saying condos, because the condo market is dead, we should say Toronto's construction and development industry. What do you think?
Construction and development industry. Look at this. We have an on-air productive
then it still makes sense,
here.
Building Toronto Skyline, okay? And even though the book is focused on the condo market in Toronto, but the condo market is completely dead, and that's the way it goes. So anyways, today we have an amazing guest.
I want to introduce her because when I saw the name of our guest today, I'm like, this must be a pop star, a movie star maybe. This is the name that would belong to, I don't know, an icon. Her name.
Veronica Madonna.
Veronica Madonna. Please, Nick, your first question for Veronica, we're going to chat with her right now, is you got to find out if that's a real name. Okay, that sounds to me like a stage name. Veronica Madonna. I can't wait to hear this.
Yeah, that name, just saying the words makes me feel that you're a star.
Absolutely.
Wow. Thank you so much. It is 100% real, and I have to thank my parents for that.
Wonderful. And welcome to the show, Veronica, and we're very excited about talking to you. And, I guess because we got you on as a guest, I said, Mike, why don't we do an all-women's month on Building Toronto Skyline? So, because most of the guests have been men, and but I was very excited to talk to you because you're doing some very innovative things in your firm, and we wanted to hear more about it on the show today. And you've got a great wealth of experience, and your background is amazing. So, and you know what? You're a woman in construction and development, and it's a very male-oriented industry, as you're probably aware. More and more women all the time, though. But I'm a big fan of women in construction, and I like having them in the industry. I guess I lived in a household full of women, so I can appreciate them. So tell us a little bit about Veronica. Tell us a little bit about your background and your story and your history and how you started your firm and all that kind of stuff. Start at the beginning, though.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Nick. It's just a wonderful pleasure to be here and just have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about what we do, and I think our shared interests and goals in the building industry. So I'm a licensed architect. I'm also an educator and advocate for regenerative design and low carbon principles. As you mentioned, I'm also a female architect, and a lot of our work, it focuses around mentoring women in the industry. So that's a big part of not only my teaching, but my practice.
Great.
I'm the founding principal of Studio VMA, and I'm also an associate professor of architecture at Athabasca University. I think that in the time that we're in today, bringing innovation and looking at industry and research and practice really needs to go hand in hand. My work spans over 2 decades of practice. I've been practicing for over 20 years. And a lot of my work has been involved with sustainability, community-driven projects, and looking at the impacts of not only the environment, but also social and cultural impacts.
That's great.
Yeah. And
so where did you study?
I studied initially at Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly Ryerson University.
Well, I went there too.
Yeah. A lot of people in the industry had started their roots there. And then I moved on to Dalhousie University for a Master's of Architecture after that.
Nova Scotia. Yes.
That's right. Beautiful Nova Scotia.
Yeah,
Love it.
Yeah.
I wish I could have stayed there. I would have loved to stay there.
Things are happening. I hear things are happening over there. So
Oh yeah. There are wonderful things and wonderful innovative things happening there. There's a big rise and push for mass timber there right now, and bringing together both culture and architecture and housing is a great focus there now.
Yeah, I stayed at the Muir Hotel. That's the new hotel down in downtown Halifax.
Yeah,
it's
beautiful.
a beautiful hotel. Yeah, it was fantastic. Really great experience. So tell us a little bit. Okay, so you got you work for some credible firms over the years, and tell me about your stay there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my own practice about 5 years ago. Just coincidentally, it coincided when the pandemic happened. But prior to that, I was a principal architect with Moriyama Tashima Architects, where I spent a lot of time there working with a wonderful group of people, looking at new ways of thinking of architecture. It was the first moment I was exposed to the ideas of concepts of heightened sustainability, moving into the concepts of regeneration, thinking about mass timber, and thinking about community impacts of building. That was core to the ethos of the practice. And that kind of really led me into where I am now with my own practice. And one of the things I was really interested in at that point in time when I started was not only to push research into practice and seeing that there was a really important need to that. I felt that education and educating the next generation of architects was really important. So I'd always dabbled in teaching, but at that point I started to think, I think there's a real opportunity to establish a practice that could really focus on architecture, innovation, and research to think of new ways, because I think we're at a pivotal moment in time. We have many crises that we're managing, climate, housing, and we have to think carefully about what our next steps are for our future generations.
Makes sense. And I think we're trying to solve them with old ways instead of new innovative ways. So that's why I wanted to hear about this, because, it's really innovation is the thing that will solve a lot of these problems if we actually make the right decisions, as you said. So when did you start during the pandemic for any particular reason, your firm? What was that all about?
Again,
did you just decide I want to go out on my own? Is that what you did?
Yeah, at that point I decided that, I wanted to go out on my own, mostly to really kind of push this idea that it's sometimes a bit easier to do when it's a smaller practice, to be a little bit more agile in terms of how you approach projects and what type of projects you take on. So that kind of really was the step. It was a big leap for sure. But I think it was an important leap for me and where I was personally, and also where I wanted to take my own career in the industry.
Well, I think that's a great, I commend you for taking that leap. And, it's, I did the same thing when I was working with someone else, and I decided, I got that first condo project, and I'm going to give this a try. So I haven't looked back. I mean, there's been a lot of bumps along the road, being especially in the construction business. When you're designing something, you get to correct it 10, 20 times before it's the final product, right? With construction, it's very, very tough. You've got to execute. Time is a factor, and working with the right people is important. And so many things can go wrong during construction if you're not careful. And, over the years, you learn to be more and more careful, and you try to, sort of lower your risk in terms of when you're doing projects so that you can, perform better. And all of that is about bringing the right people in and bringing the right team, putting the right team together. So whether that's a client that you're working for, if he doesn't sound like a good client, stay away. That's always a good, that we've learned that. Sometimes you don't really know. The client could sound really good at the beginning, but then afterwards you find out something else. But also you have to have a good people in your own team. You have to have good project managers, good site supers. You have to have a great backup, people for your company that really makes the engine roar. And all of these things come into play and working with great consultants too, like yourself. And these are the things that make a project successful. I use the analogy of baking a cake, putting the right ingredients together to get a good quality product. So, and you put the wrong ingredients in, and your cake is not so great anymore. So, but
I agree. I agree 100%. I think this is where we are in our industry as well, as an integrated approach, and having the right team really kind of accelerates the potential. And I agree with you 100%.
And I love the fact that you're all about innovation, because, at Fusion Corp, we're also looking at all the latest technologies. Me as an entrepreneur, and also, an author and an author of ideas, I like to explore what is the future going to be like. And I think we're underselling ourselves with some of the solutions we're coming up with right now. And something that really, really piqued my interest is I hear that you're doing a 3D printing. You're doing a 3D printing house, if I'm not mistaken. And
Yes.
Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
We like to learn, because I know nothing about this, actually.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting where the industry is going. We are focused on many types of innovation.
We're going to get to them all. Okay.
Yeah, we'll get to them all. Like we've driven, ideas of mass timber together, but now we're kind of moving into other types of innovation, because we're starting to see that, there's so many challenges in the construction industry, costs, affordability, having skilled labor available, and even just piquing the interest of the next generation in the building industry to get into it. And so 3D printing, I think, has a wonderful potential to kind of really mend a lot of these aspects. We're working on a house right now for Habitat for Humanity in Peterborough, and it was a bit of a test pilot for them to look at how do we bring housing attainability that is cost effective and manages some of the challenges with labor.
Because they have
so
a lot of volunteers.
Build.
I did some work with Habitat, and I kind of know how they operate. So so they came to you, you knew them, or how did you get involved with Habitat?
Well, actually, we were approached by a company who is building a 3D printing company here called Coremore. And
what are they? Coremore?
Coremore, yes. So they've been exploring 3D printing here in Ontario for a number of years. And so we've had a couple of initial discussions and started to think about, what this innovation could mean in the industry. And then we started to develop the systems to actually implement a 3D printed building, because actually it's quite challenging here in Canada in colder climates to think about the building science of 3D printing and how to manage all the building code requirements, as well as the building science, differences that we see here versus other places that are currently accelerating 3D printed buildings, which are usually in more kind of southern climates.
So how does Coremore? How do they know? You've known them before, or you've met them in the past, or they brought you this opportunity?
Yeah, just coincidentally, we met. They kind of just gave me a call one day and said, I saw your work. Let's chat. And they were interested in our willingness to innovate and think of new ways of doing things. And so we were chatting for probably almost a year before we actually started the project, talking about what would the challenges be and how could we approach this project. And then we started to work on the project. And like you said, we brought on an excellent team to help resolve some of these issues. So we brought on RDH building science specialist to work with us directly to help resolve some of the challenges that are involved with 3D printing. And so we're happy to say it's under construction right now. And it's going to be an interesting test pilot as to what are the possibilities for this type of construction, in particular for smaller scale residential infill, perhaps where there's challenges in accessing the site. There could be lots of opportunities, even in rural and remote communities. This could be an interesting option, because I really do think that in order to address, a key challenge of housing and also climate change, we have to think of many solutions. One solution is not going to fit all. So this
Agree.
is a great possibility.
So 3D printing. So what are some of the things that you had to go through during the design process?
Well, we had to learn very carefully what the materials of 3D printing are, how exactly
is it concrete or?
It's a concrete mixture at this time, and but there's some really innovative research being done in this area where they're actually looking at infusing it with wood fiber and opportunities to make it lower carbon. So that I think there's going to be some really interesting stuff coming out soon on the research end of that. But some of the other things that we had to really think about is exactly how is the robot, going to actually construct, and how are we going to actually integrate things like insulation and rain screen and waterproofing as the robot is constructing. So we had to kind of learn those processes ahead of even starting design, so that we could approach the design with, a prefabricated or a digitally fabricated construction method. We couldn't just take pen to paper and start designing without knowing exactly the processes in which that would take place.
So what did you do in terms of how did you implement some of those building science principles? Like obviously the insulation, does it go on the outside, inside? Is it like conventional construction? How thick is the wall for the 3D printing house?
Yeah, so we approach it in a more traditional way of construction, because otherwise, if we had gone into something outside of the norm of what the building code would permit or what we could prove, we would have to do a number of testing, and we would have to do a number of code compliant solutions. So we wanted to ensure, because of schedule and also the affordability of the project, to ensure how we approached it met code and other regulatory standards of construction, that it met that. So we looked at putting in the insulation and a drainage layer, as you would with any other wall system, versus looking at sandwich panel type systems that would have had to been a little bit more tested for this particular product, because the 3D printing edge wasn't quite recognized yet. So this is where the innovation in the method of construction is there. However, the regulatory and standards are needing to catch up in order for it to be implemented more fluidly into the industry.
Nice. So what's the wall assembly typical for this house? Can you give us a rough idea?
I can give you a general idea. So the 3D printing kind of works in a fluid motion. So it's going to be printing around. There are like concrete pillars as a structural component. So the 3D printing is not the structural, it's not like a load-bearing system at this point for this house. But then we kind of have the infill of insulation, the different membranes, and the drainage mat that will make up the assembly.
And what's the floor? What's the floor assembly? Is it, what do you do? What do you cover the floor with?
Well, this is a one-story building, so the floor assembly will be a concrete floating slab. So it's if we had gone into 2 stories, it'd be a little bit more trickier. But as a 1-story, it's just a traditional concrete
and the roof
floor slab.
And the roof is
wood
frame or trusses? Or?
Yes, it'll be a wood frame roof system.
Nice. I can see how this would work for Habitat, because they always have to rely on volunteers, and then it's tricky for them. So this is a good pilot project for them. And so what? So did you? How were the approvals with the city of Toronto? Was that? How long did that take? Curious.
Well, so this is in Peterborough. So
Peterborough. So
yes, yeah. But the approvals were interesting. There was a lot of communication back and forth, not only with Cormor and the municipality, as well as ourselves, just starting the conversation off as to what this would mean, what would be required. So we had a lot of early on conversations as to how would this be accepted? What are some of the things we would have to do to prove its, construction and design? But once we went into building permit and submitted the building permit documents, it actually was approved really quickly, which was actually a surprise to me, because anytime you deal with a new system, it's always kind of the case where there's a little bit more back and forth.
So how long did the total process take you for a 3D printed house?
In terms of permitting?
Yeah, well, permitting and pre-permit, I guess, and dealing with.
Well, the conversations of pre-permit were happening for a while. We did spend a lot of time in design because we needed to figure out the wall system very carefully. So we did spend, probably about 6 months in design of this house. But the permit itself, I think, was executed in less than 2 months.
Yeah, as a typical permit. Once you got the other things out of the way, obviously, right?
Exactly.
And so that's really, really cool. So can I see can I visit the site with you one of these days?
Yeah, we can try to make that happen for sure.
Yeah, because I think it would be cool that, because I post the podcast, and then I think it would be really cool to have, a video feed of this thing in action, and I can say, put your name on it, and do a social post. Yeah, it'd be really cool.
They're doing earthwork right now, but as soon as we get into the 3D printing component, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm going to check out the company Core more, right?
Exactly.
Really exciting. So hats off to you on trying something new and innovative. So then you're also involved in the mass timber stuff too, eh? So you've done a few of the mass timber projects?
Yes, absolutely. So, interesting enough, some people say, well, mass timber, 3D printing, they seem like opposites, but we kind of see them as parallel streams.
No, they're parallel streams for sure.
Absolutely. Parallel streams of innovation to deal with some of the critical issues we're dealing with today. So mass timber, my first exposure to mass timber construction was my time at Moriyama Teshima Architects, where I was a senior architect and project manager of Limberlost Place, which is a 10-story mass timber building for academic use at the George Brown College campus in downtown Toronto. So at that time, that project broke a lot of boundaries. We were above the code, prescriptive code requirements. So we had to prove how that would work. We were doing a large assembly occupancy, a lot of people in there. So there was a lot of concern about managing the risks of that project. But then in addition to that, because it was a school, we really needed mass timber to span great distances to make the classrooms work. And so we were looking at long span mass timber systems. And so, again, worked with an incredible team of not only within the architectural practice, but also our partnering architect, Acton Austri, who brought their great experience and depth in mass timber to the project. But then also with our engineers and consultants, an incredible project there. And that kind of really, I think, broke a lot of boundaries in mass timber in the Toronto Skyline. You're starting to see now a lot more taller mass timber buildings. It helped with the modifications of the building code to now allow for things like 18-story encapsulated mass timber is where the code will now allow. And it started to, make me pique my interest into saying, how can we use mass timber in many different building types? Right. Thinking about mid-rise construction, even low-rise construction, rural construction, where shortages of labor and material is really a challenge, and starting to look at different aspects of that.
Yeah, I find it's an interesting product. There's a lot of, hype for mass timber. It's costly. So a lot of people are concerned about that as developers and construction people. There's a lot of innovation from various companies that are doing this right now. So there's what's interesting is I understand there's the wood actually has a fire rating too, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? So
yes, absolutely. Yeah. So how you design the mass timber component, The thicker you go, the more fire rating component it will have. So it kind of runs on the idea of char principle.
Yeah, char principle.
Where,
Yeah, I
exactly.
learned that when we were because we were exploring, we were doing adaptive reuse, and the old timber structures. It was like an old 1900s factory. It was built in the 1900s. And so we said, the developer was saying, well, look, I've got all this beautiful wood and I want to expose it. And how can I do that? It's been done before. So, probably it was done a long time ago when the building code was less stringent. But we explored the idea of using the sort of thicker timber planks that were there. And the char, we found out that the char gave a fire rating, and it was interesting. But we weren't able to achieve what we wanted to achieve, unfortunately. We still had to put, drywall ceilings and encapsulate it. So, but it was quite interesting to look at that as well. But so, what are you working on? Any mass timber projects right now?
Well, we have a couple in the books right now. But what's interesting, you brought about the idea of cost, and a lot of what our practice does is we get a lot of clients that come to us that have a vision, and they have a vision to design, a sustainable or regenerative project, but they kind of don't know where to take it next. And so we work with a lot of clients to do like feasibility reports and first steps on that. And we actually, about 2 years ago, we were working with the Toronto District School Board, where they came to us and said, we want to do a mass timber primary school, but of course we have constraints of cost, and we have time constraints of construction. We have to reduce our risk, but we want to do this because we know that there's great health and wellness benefits that could be implemented by just being around natural materials, children in these buildings and teachers in these buildings. So we went through a very in-depth feasibility study, and what we really kind of laid out for them is that when you approach a mass timber building, you have to approach it as a mass timber building right off from the offset, because you really need to optimize the system. And if you can optimize the system, what we proved in that project by doing a fulsome cost comparison between traditional schools and mass timber, as we were actually like within 2% of the cost of a traditional construction. But you had to take a different approach, right? You had to think about optimizing the material, reducing waste of the material, and then also considering the speed of your construction. You can shave off 6 months easily on a primary school. And so that cost, of course, is a great cost during construction. And so with that feasibility study, they actually moved forward to take that idea as next steps, and they're building their first primary school in mass timber out in Scarborough. Well, we did the feasibility study.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And it's I believe Moriyama Tashima is actually the architect of record.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Moving it forward.
Wonderful. So, in terms, do you work with any mass timber suppliers? Like, who are your go-to people that you use in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a great relationship with Element 5, who
Everybody's heard of them,
mass timber here in Ontario. Also, great relationship with Timmerman Timberworks, which looks at nail laminated timber more in the line of some of those traditional wood structures you would have seen in older buildings, and working with other manufacturers across Canada. There are a limited amount now, but it's just growing. It's just growing exponentially.
So, do you see the cost coming down on mass timber eventually, or is it when will we see prices normalize for mass timber? Do you see that happening? Is it design, or is it how you design it? Is it what kind of factors come into play there? What will bring the cost down more competitively for a product like that?
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors. I think first and foremost, design can have a lot of impact. So looking at a really optimized systems design and thinking about that. But I also think that even just training the workforce into building with mass timber. So, working in just training builders to understand the system and also find the efficiencies of that system. Because like I said, there's potential to reduce construction costs dramatically. And I think it stems at working in an integrative process. And whenever I work on a mass timber project, I always say it's absolutely imperative to have not only the whole consultant team on board, but to be sitting beside the builder, to be sitting beside the manufacturer of the mass timber, the mechanical consultant, or the mechanical installer, to everyone be at the same table, because then we can have open and honest discussions about how do we bring down the costs, how do we design more efficiently, and how do we achieve the goals that we're all setting out to achieve.
Yes.
So I think we also need to have a change of mind frame in that sense, where we have to work more collaboratively from the very start.
Well, that's interesting because, I've done every kind of structure you can think of, from wood frame to wood panelization. I've used ICF, total precast steel, cold form steel, and reinforced concrete. I've done every single structure. I've built every single structure out there that you can think of, except for mass timber. And, whenever you're doing something new, you learn something from that process, obviously. And it's a learning curve. And, you have to sort of understand how things will go down, what things the trades need to know about mass timber when they're doing, for example, floors and walls and stuff like that. How do you create openings in the floor system for all the ductwork? Because that's similar to like a precast system. I'm pretty sure that's how it would work. Of course, I haven't done it, but I'm pretty sure. I'm guessing. But every new system comes with a learning curve, and I think we would definitely like to do a mass timber project in the near future. So
yeah, I would love to do one with you.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'll find the customer. We'll find the customer, and we'll do it together. So So tell us a little bit about some other subjects. Like, you're a big proponent of sustainability and regeneration. So tell me a little bit about those concepts and the cultural fabric as well, because that seems to be at the heart of your firm and the heart of your philosophy for design.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking that question. I think, we're really focusing on kind of a next level of sustainability, and we push it into the framework of regenerative design, meaning that every building, every, moment that we impact our land, we can have a tremendous positive benefit. Let's not just try to stay neutral, which is where sustainability kind of lends itself to, but let's have a positive impact. And I think when you start to think about building design and the built industry as having an impact on the land, on people, on society, we start to make different choices, and we start to think more holistically about our practices. And so we look at, a regenerative framework from the very onset of design through to construction. We think about, in construction methodology, how can we have more equitable practices of construction? So, for instance, I really think that prefabrication can open the doors to a lot more people versus on-site labor. We can start to maybe lure in some of the youth in the industry, kind of bringing in the ideas of robotics, computer, and digitalization. We can now bring in the next generation and have them more interested in construction. Women can practice more in construction when it's a more digital and offsite prefabrication method. Mm-hmm. And just, we can open it up. But then we also, should think about the impact in terms of a holistic consideration. How does it impact the culture of a community? How do we involve society, and how do we incorporate that into our design practices? So that's really at the core of the way I position regenerative design. There's many different positionings of regenerative design, but I really try to think of it in that sense.
Well, that's very interesting. Yeah, I think it's when I look at the climate, call it the climate crisis that we're living in right now, I find the solutions fall short. And that's and I think I kind of just say, well, you know what? Honestly, the technology is not there, and maybe that's going to take some time for us to develop. Like, I'm talking about humanity here, And I also see that, there's a lot of, you brought up the term equity, and it's an important discussion piece. I think in our country we're much more equitable, but if you look at the world, you go and you vacation somewhere, you see that they're living a completely different reality.
Yeah.
They're trying to put food on the table. There's no such thing as, they don't care about pollution. They don't care about a lot of things. Now, it's kind of like a first world, third world sort of scenario where you're visiting, like, maybe it's a country in Africa or South America, and you're really seeing the differences. And you say to yourself, well, you know what? We're really focused on this stuff. The rest of the world, it isn't. And it's not because it's like it doesn't, people around the world don't care about these concepts. And there's a lot of countries that are very caring for sustainability and progressive, but it's unfair for us to say, hey, we're so wealthy, we're doing all these great things, but the rest of the world, they can't really do that. And because they're focusing on other, just putting food on the table or trying to even make a living. So I think it's, I think the world needs to be more equitable to get us all to approach something like, to reach a goal of, sustainability in our practices. And maybe we're a leading nation in terms of sustainability here in Canada and the U.S. and other European countries, and maybe Singapore and some of those other communities out there in Asia. But, I think it's something to think about. It's so you have this massive imbalance where we're really not tackling that problem, and how do you deal with that? And maybe I'll put the question, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you say on the one side that we've got these great ideas and we're starting to implement them here, but the rest of the world is falling far behind?
Yeah. I think this is a really great conversation. I think, and I think it comes down to, maybe touching upon the idea of regenerative design again, and that, one of the things we also do is we always try to take a passive first approach and take the cues from the land and the climate we're in. So when we take that approach, we start to think about passive design, so orientation and different aspects like that don't cost a lot of money. It's just kind of smart designing.
Yeah,
but then we
point.
also start to think about biomaterials. We start to think about regional and local materials, because that can have a huge impact on embodied carbon. But it was interesting, this conversation. I just spent 2 years going back and forth to a country in South Africa called Lesotho. And we were working with a wonderful social enterprise called Rise. And we were working in the communities, not only teaching the students that I work with about regional and biomaterials and doing things like rammed earth and compressed earth bricks, but we were also looking at the kind of community and social engagement. And what's really interesting, when we were there, the 2 times that I was there over the 2 years, the impacts of climate change is really great in those communities. And they're seeing that there's like devastating rainfalls and mudslides that are taking out houses and stuff like that. And so climate change is actually at the core of the community that are there. But I think one of the things that I realized is that our approach to construction in certain communities and the way we approach regenerative principles sometimes can just come back to more simple practices. So perhaps, making the earth brick on site versus having manufactured brick come from distances. Looking at orientation and perhaps thinking about how climate change is impacting the local community. So maybe raising buildings high to avoid flooding disasters and stuff like that. But I think that, when we're thinking about these things and we're thinking on a global perspective, it's not like a one size fits all situation. But there has to be more coming together in terms of what is the global impact of climate change and how do we approach that? And then I started to think a lot too about our own country here and some of the rural communities that actually face very similar challenges to some of the global South communities, and thinking about how do we then bring those practices back as well, because we have a divide here in the country as well in terms of you know shortages of infrastructure, of um, you know and it's coming down onto the communities as well. So a lot of our practice now is working in rural communities and looking at how do we think about regenerative practices and the impacts of climate change to build more housing.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. A really good. Commend you on caring so much about these communities, and it's good to see, because a lot of people are just in it for design, money, and so on and so forth. So, but so what about, are you using AI in any way in your practice at all, or have you been starting to think about that? I mean, imagine artificial intelligence like in a remote community that can say, hey, use all these passive design techniques, and so you can build locally. Like, that's how we used to build, actually, is that we used local materials. Like, you had marble from Greece, and you created the Acropolis, or whatever the case may be. They used materials like, even I have a courthouse and jail in Owen Sound. They used all the local stone to build the courthouse. Like, that's kind of the similar prospect of what, except now we're using all this energy to bring materials to us. So that's maybe that's something. So are you using AI at all, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it was just interesting. I have a great friend and consultant. She's from BIM DNA, and she is helping me right now, guiding me through different systems to implement. Because it's interesting, the idea of doing passive first and more simple practices actually really benefits by using AI and BIM related processes in order to do your design work. So we use a lot of digital technology to help us understand the impacts of wind and soil conditions and things like that. So we're actually implementing a series of tools to kind of guide us through looking strategically at like thermal modeling and daylighting, looking at generative design options, so to maximize whatever it is that we're trying to maximize. And it's all based on AI principles and AI generative. But at the same time, it's important for me that it's still a collaborative working methodology with an AI, because I think it'll be very dangerous if you just let the AI go off on its own and do its own thing.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so we work with it in a very collaborative way to try to solve some very complex problems.
But you're the decider at the end of the day.
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we have to maintain as the decider.
Well, who knows what's going to happen in the future? You never know.
Yeah.
So, okay, something to pivot off to. So let's. So this is. I didn't know it was going to be the month of the women in construction, but it is now, and Building Toronto Skyline. So we're going to get some more female guests to join the show and talk about their time in the industry. And so, what as a woman founder, what shifts have you seen in the architectural world?
Well, I think it's I think it's really important to ensure that we maintain support for all people, and in particular for women in the construction industry. When I graduated from school, there was 50% girls, 50% boys, like it was equal, right? In terms of that. But
well, just let me say, when I was graduated in 97, there was like 5 or 10 girls and like 100 guys. So
yeah, so the shift has happened, and it's maintaining that shift. But what's happening is that as women are going through practice, there comes a point, usually around the 10-year mark, usually the point in which someone's maybe deciding to have a family, or perhaps you're expecting promotion or more leadership role. There becomes a moment in time where hard decisions are being made. And we're seeing a lot of women who are leaving the industry at that point. And so my whole, goal is, and in my practice, as well as in my teaching, is to demonstrate not only through my own practices. I've been working in the industry for over 20 years, but I'm also a mother of two, that we can do that. And I think the key is that we need to have more empathy towards each other, and we need to have more flexibility in terms of life and work balances. And we need to kind of recognize that there's value in maintaining women in the construction industry.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so, because they're better than men sometimes. I find men very lazy and they don't do their job properly. I find women very detailed and thorough and, taking care of all their responsibilities. Whereas guys, like, they're lazy and they would just want to do all the fun stuff. So, anyways, that's I don't know. Maybe I'm talking about myself. Who knows? But so how can studios be more intentional about equity and mentorship and stuff like that, especially towards women? And what advice would you give emerging women designers today?
Yeah, well, I think first, in terms of how practices can be more supportive, is perhaps having open conversations. What do your employees need, right? And so our practice is a near virtual practice. Our people work virtually, and that works for the people that we work with. But we also have a studio where we meet, a share workspace that we can meet. But what's important is that I'm very flexible. As long as we have open conversations to say, okay, this is our objectives, let's talk about how to get there, that works for me. The other thing too is I find too is when you're working in these environments that are more flexible, it takes a little bit more work on your end, right? Like, we have to be a little bit more organized ourselves to direct a team more efficiently. I think that's one big criticism, is it's working virtually or remotely is inefficient. I think it's only inefficient because of those who are working to manage those teams. So we have to be more organized in that way. But I also, would encourage women in the industry to always advocate for what they need and for themselves. And that, it's not, to just advocate for yourself and to find those who you can be mentors to you to help you through some difficult times, because there's difficult times in the industry for sure.
And hire more women. How's that?
Hire more women. That's right.
Get rid of these bums that are like useless and all these men who well, you know what? I think, construction obviously is also somewhat aggressive, with the trades, and, there's also misogyny in construction. That's, it's there. Mm-hmm. The trades, doing all these things and stuff like that. I mean, I think people now are more professional, obviously, and I'm sure you see that across the board. But that still exists. And so how do you deal with, for example, if there's a trade that's not doing something where I pick up the phone and I'm going to scream and yell at occasionally, I'll do that. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do you feel? Like, do you approach it in a different way? Sometimes women can be more aggressive than men, but there is that sort of dynamic there. And how do you feel about that? And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, we've all been in that situation for sure. I think you have to stand as a strong woman, especially when you're, going through your construction processes. But at the end of the day, you have to stand up for what you believe is the right direction and don't back down. And so, I usually approach it with knowledge first. So if there's something specific that maybe we're not seeing eye to eye on, I would take the extra time to say, this is why we need to do it this way, and then speak about it and talk about it, right? Sometimes you just have to put your foot down, and you put your foot down. But, I think, having a more collaborative discussion and approach will go a long way, so that I think you can become and see more eye to eye on certain things. But you have to maintain your ground and maybe not second guess yourself, which oftentimes women will do. We'll second guess ourselves. But we need to have more confidence in that way for sure.
Good point. So, and what do you see as the next, the most amazing things that are coming out right now? Are you using special software systems? I think robotics is somewhat of the future. I think AI is going to play a huge role in the construction industry coming up. I think the solution for housing will be innovation instead of something that we're not even really at yet. And at some point, we're going to have some very innovative ways of building buildings. It's not quite there yet. Maybe it's. But what do you feel is the future for Toronto? How poised are we to be future ready?
Yes, yeah. I think there's a lot of great leaders in the industry right now that are looking at innovation, but I think that we need to, like you said, look outside of the box we're in right now. And I think AI and using AI to your benefit will take us a long way. I think looking at generative practices where we can test many models quickly, looking to optimize performances of building and optimize ultimately the cost of building as well. I think that will help us a lot. But I think that, we need to look at multi-pronged approach. I don't think it's a one fit all situation. I think prefabrication will really start to advance the industry, and looking at how can we implement prefabricated systems and modular systems in our design thinking and as well as our construction processes. I think automation is going to be partly key to advancing that for sure.
Yeah, I have a friend, Mario Ribeiro. We've had him on the show, and he's heavily invested into modular construction, wall panels, all sorts of different structural elements and stuff like that. Like I said, even modular construction, total precast is if you think about it, a modular construction from concrete. There's the mass timber now. There's still wood panelization, which you're using conventional lumber. But it seems like we're in an exciting time, and we're poised for change. We have a very tough industry right now, and the condo industry is dead, as everybody's been talking about. The housing industry is in big trouble. The world is in a kind of flux right now. But I think I'm still optimistic, and I hope you are too. And I think you're a very optimistic person, and you're very forward thinking, and I'm very happy that we're able to talk about these matters, and we learned a lot today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
Yeah, incredible.
And thank you for listening to Building Toronto's Skyline, a podcast exploring the current state of Toronto's construction and development industries. Proudly brought to you by Fusion Corp Development Incorporated. Please share, like, and subscribe. See you again in 2 weeks.